Good viewer, you are watching Exert Us. This is because Exert Us makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Exert Us for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Exert Us, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Exert Us. Your friends will come to like Exert Us, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Exert Us. See, that was easy.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Exert Us. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Неформально образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, the skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Exert Us. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Exert Us.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
Dude, the banned Mormon cartoon's like the best cartoon, right? How's it going, Jacob? It's good to see you.
I didn't even realize it was banned. It's good to see you again, Andreas. And you got to see me in my full glory eating ice cream and chicken wings from my car earlier today.
That's a keto diet. Honestly, that's what I do myself sometimes. I feel like that's pretty reasonable.
It was the keto ice cream. It was that low carb because, it's good stuff. So that was my one meal of the day. So I'm glad you got to see me in my heavenly consuming of calorie glory.
Yeah, we got to move away from birds to snakes. You know what I mean? Because like in Hong Kong, they're doing snake pizza now. And I think that's the way to go. Rattlesnake. Have you ever eaten rattlesnake? It's amazing.
I have. So there's a place called Q Burger in Albuquerque, downtown Albuquerque, New Mexico. And they have a rattlesnake burger with this chile queso sauce on top of it. And I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, that sounds like my kind of thing. Well, we were talking about all sorts of things, and we wanted to do a video for a while talking about like history, but there was a video I was watching on the internet just the other 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, not Slavoj Zizek. Sorry. I mean, yeah, I was watching Slavoj Zizek. Oh God, aren't we all watching Slavoj Zizek? Let's just force everyone. Have you ever seen Ludwig von Drake, Donald Duck's cousin, on crack?
Yeah, but these kind of names, Ludwig.
He beat Daddy Peterson in a debate, and I just want to reiterate it really randomly, really quickly, because it's important, because that's not what's going on, but he did talk about everything at once. So yeah, just a segue that didn't belong there. But Ward Radio, Ward Radio is good, and there's a pretty cool show.
Keep in mind, their previous name was Midnight Mormons, and they
My
put
favorite name of any podcast.
In other words, they're so much dedicated to the policies of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that they abandoned the name Mormon. Even though just a few years ago there was the ad campaign, I'm a Mormon. I'm a Mormon.
Dare to be a Mormon. Dare to be a Mormon.
And then President Nelson says, if you use that term in referring to a member of the church, it is a victory for Satan.
Well, you know what? Just because you said that, let's just remember Monson for a second. Okay, so like, okay, why did they say that? Dare to be a Mormon was because one time there was a point when they're in the army, in the military, and they're standing around. They say, okay, we're going to organize you guys. You're all alone here. You all come from different places in America, but we're going to organize you. Catholics, go stand over there. Baptists, over there. Like the Lutherans.
I remember this story.
This is a true story. And then Monson stood alone. He stood there, and then the sergeant came up to him and said, "What are you?" And he said, "Mormon, sir."
And there was a few of them. There was
and
a
there
few
were.
of them.
He didn't know it, but they said, "All right, well, all of you go over there." Can he realize 5 guys at least were behind him? They all stood there, and so they all dared to be a Mormon. So I always thought that was interesting. That's a pretty cool story, regardless of anything else, But yeah, and I thought that's kind of exactly how I felt about it when they started saying they were going to retire the term. But okay, well, it's really cool of them to try to like respect people, respect their elders. I think in the most literal sense, they're trying to do what they think is important. I was told that they weren't forced to. It wasn't that they were told that they had to change their name. It was that, they decided that like, because they'd heard it, like this is what they're saying now. This is what the living revelation is. So that's just in their defense why. And I do like the ward. I think it's a cute name. I think Midnight Mormon's obviously the coolest name. But the thing is, they did this at like 2:00 in the morning. I felt maybe I'm wrong here, but it feels like it was just in the middle of the night. And they were pretty exhausted, but they did this video that was, did Joseph Smith even polygamy, bro? And I thought it was a cool title, and it was great because it has Don Bradley, who wrote 116 pages, which is all the missing pages.
Best hair there, but no, Brad Whitbeck has the best hair, but Don Bradley is a very close second. Both of those hairlines that have not retreated one bit.
Dude, I do love Canadians for all that they do. We do the MK Canada show where we talk about Canadian mind control, but that's aside. It's a great thing that they're trying to talk about here. It's a really important subject. So they start out by saying, you want to talk about it? Yeah,
let me just give a little bit of my background. So I was born and raised LDS. My father was a convert to the church, raised in this super active family prayers all the time, church every single Sunday. We're rarely ever late, serving in callings. Like I was a super enthusiastic missionary. And my dad was particularly studious. Some of the sources that caused people consternation, like Sunstone and other places, he wanted to know what's the doctrine at the earliest time of the Restoration. And he was heavily into the teachings of Brigham Young on the subject of polygamy and other things. He was quite convinced of it. So when I was a teenager, prior to being a missionary, I knew that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. Right. Not only that, but I felt like I had a meaningful explanation. When that kind of question came up as a missionary, I never felt caught off guard. I was able to teach the doctrine of polygamy in a way to where most commonly people say, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, they told me as a kid, I think I was 6 to 8 years old. They were like, yeah, there was the Mormon extermination order. They tried to kill all the women and children. After that, then they told me that there was a bunch of women without husbands. And so they needed to have, this is the way it was explained to me. I'm not saying this is historically correct.
I know they're giving the nicest version. What they're giving you is what would be the most sympathetic version of it, which is you and I think both know that it is far removed from reality.
Well, reality is far removed from itself, of course, but they did try to bring up the fact that there's questions about this, and there's a lot of people talking about it. And in fact, you've actually talked on Ward Radio with them a little bit about this.
I've been on their program, I think at least 3 times, possibly 4 different times. And I deliberately caused some consternation. For one thing, I like those guys, and I think there's enough love and trust in us that I'll get direct, but I think I get direct to the point to where they don't like contributions as much.
I want to give them the accolade of saying, like, I think Cardin's doing a really important thing. I think it's really cool that they're trying to make a show that's helping people, and I mean that really. I think that's a really important. There's not a lot of shows that are doing that. He could be like Dick Masterson.
They are some of the only ones. I mean, they've got about 22,000 subscribers, but they are some of the only individuals that are trying to capture the rising generation of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good thing. But so they bring up the subject, and kind of in the same vein as saying, like, I mean, they pretty much are saying that they're not really interested in the subject. But I mean, Kwaku clearly wants to put together a debate, but they're talking about whether or not polygamy is real, right? Like that's basically what it comes down to. Is the whole thing historically true? And there's a lot of evidence it's not, right? Like that's what they're getting at. Like that there's a lot of people that are behind this movement, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of that, and I do want to point out that on one conversation, I asked Brad Whitbeck if he had a if he had a spiritual witness that polygamy was a commandment from God, and he answered in the affirmative. I'll find that clip because I'm going to be making a response video to the full video that you're about to see. So you're seeing up on the screen my channel, Disciple of Christ, and most commonly it's People's Spiritual Journeys. I'm making a response video to the full thing with the conversation with Don Bradley because there's some obvious falsehoods that would easily be pinata style smashed open. Brad Whitbeck confirmed that he has a spiritual witness. Now, on my conversation with Jacob Hansen of Thoughtful Faiths, I specifically no, he's from Thoughtful Faiths, but this is another conversation on Ward Radio. I asked him, dead blank, do you have a spiritual witness from God that Joseph Smith was commanded to marry teenage girls? And he answered in the affirmative, yes. And so in other words, they're really setting themselves in the polygamy is a commandment from God camp. So I appreciate that level of like clarity and directness. But one of the things that I like about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is bold claims because they're falsifiable. They can either be verified or falsified. So when they don't dance around on something that clear, boom, let's go ahead and explore it.
Trial by fire, burn all falsities, hold fast to what is true. I like it. I mean, and this is interesting because for a lot of people, this is really a historicity thing here for a lot of people. A lot of people are just looking at a movement. I find it interesting just looking at utopian socialist movements in America. You got the Mateus movement, you got Owenism and socialism across America, and you've got this establishment of Zion. This is essentially a utopian socialist movement, and there are a lot of them, right? But this one's one that happens right before the Civil War, and it impacts everything about the way America works, right before the anti-Mason party takes over the Republican Party. So there's a lot to be said about what's going on in Joseph Smith's world. Even just from, even an atheist could wonder like what was going on with this, if it is just a group that takes everyone over.
I'm just prepping some scriptures.
Sure.
Now here's what would probably be good is if you and I, let's start that video from Midnight Mormons from the Ward Radio. I'm just prepping a couple of things because Don Bradley is really going to set this up as I'm a trained historian. I'm willing to put out a challenge. And the challenge that he puts out is not, let's talk about the details. What he says in his challenge is, if you're willing to find somebody trained the same way I am, let's discuss their findings. In other words, there is so much contempt for the members of the church willing to research things themselves. He really falls into the camp of you're not qualified to analyze these things. Those of a higher intellect class, we're the ones that are allowed to discuss the implications of what the historical record says.
Right. Well, and I also want to give Bradley credit for what he's doing. And like you have to remember, let's give him the criticism of like he was already a member, he left the thing, and he comes back into it. So if you're coming back into something, you're gonna have to be more defensive of it. But he's also friends with Dan Vogel, right? And so Vogel's an interesting cat because he's always presented Mormonism as a pious or impious fraud. This idea that it's really about Masonry in America, that there's a bunch of secret symbols in the Book of Mormon that are talking about the secret combinations or talking about Freemason groups, and that there's a reason why they disbanded the lodges in Missouri, and that there's this war that comes down on them because he probably or possibly stole the magical sigils and talismans that actually empowered the temples in the first place from the Scottish Rite temple. I mean, it could be complete nonsense though, but that's the kind of thing this is what Dan Bradley was dealing with before he was back in the church. This is the kind of research that he was believing it was before he was working for FAIR, But I don't know if my audio is going to be great for doing this. So what I'm going to do?
Let's give it a try.
Oh yeah.
And then become
Let's skip it.
well and Dawn double topic today, which is
Be able
whether
to
or
hear
not
this?
Joseph Smith actually practiced polygamy. Now, why is that a hot topic that would require one of the number one scholars in Mormonism to talk about? Well, it's because there's a new movement in town. There's a new spiritual sheriff in town, and a lot of people are following this sheriff. Like a Pied Piper, he offers you two beautiful things. One, to liberate yourself of the burden of polygamy, which is seen still as an oddity by your society around you. I mean, my entire adult life, I've heard jokes about me being Mormon and multiple wives and so on and so forth.
Probably more than
basically juxtaposing American conservatism with some of the modern geopolitical moves of the church.
Yeah.
In other words, here's what I'm referring to. And one thing that I want to make sure is done. Cardin is very good about about framing things in a way that, wow, the way that these people are talking about it, it must be ridiculous. On my screen right now is Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. It claims to be a revelation from Joseph Smith, July 12th, 1843.
So this isn't like, just to clarify, this isn't like a history of like ancient times. This is, he's saying right now, this is what's going on. This is history, but it's what's news, really.
This is what he's referring to. So there's only one document in the entire world, and Don Bradley would also acknowledge that the statement I'm about to make is accurate, that this section, now known as section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, is the only document claiming to be from Joseph Smith, teaching the doctrine of polygamy, but it's very specific in what it is. Starting in verse 1, if this whoever receives this revelation, it says, "Thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant Joseph Smith, as touching the principle and doctrine of many wives and concubines." Very, very specifically, what is the doctrine according to the very first verse of there? It is the doctrine of many wives and concubines. So I actually take issue when people try to falsely say celestial plural marriage to water it down. Joseph Smith never used that term once in his entire life. And this section never uses the term polygamy. Section 132 is the doctrine of many wives and concubines. So the questions that I would have for Don Bradley and Cardin Ellis: do you believe the doctrine of many wives and concubines comes from God? Because
it sounds not very celestial marriage-y.
Yeah, whoever the God is of Doctrine and Covenants section 132 is teaching the doctrine of many wives and concubines, and you just compare that to Jacob chapter 2. Many wives and concubines is whoredoms. Now, Jacob is a high priest after the holy order of God who testifies directly of his interactions with Jesus Christ himself.
Right.
Now, whoever the God is of Doctrine and Covenants section 132, Jacob condemns the practices of David and Solomon. The God of section 132 says David and Solomon did right in the sight of God by living the principle and doctrine of many wives and concubines.
Interesting. Okay, so, all right, really quickly. This is interesting because, okay, on a historical note, you've got this idea in ancient Christianity of an angry, jealous God, which is really different from the loving God that the Jesus God is. So much so that the early Christians wondered if it was the same God. The Marcionites thought it was a different God, right? And it's also interesting because when we talk about like tuning in to frequencies or something like that, if you're talking to something, because if there really is a thing that they're kind of, you know, channeling here, right? Like, or whatever that means, that they're dealing with energies or something, that you're talking about one thing that has a certain kind of consequentialism of practice that leads to families and goodness, and another thing that leads to, like you said, like whoredoms. I mean, if you look at the history of what happened to Solomon, he starts with many wives and whoredoms, and once his concubines lead him to building a temple to another god, he goes crazy and loses everything, right? I mean, so it seems that's the reference there.
Yeah, there's let's play a little bit right there at the beginning of that Ward radio broadcast, because when they're talking about polygamy, the one I just have to emphasize, there is only one document in the world that the church recognizes as Joseph Smith teaching polygamy. It's section 132. It falsely identifies Isaac as having more than one wife. It falsely identifies Abraham as having more than one wife. He had a baby with Hagar according to Genesis, and I have my suspicions about the veracity of that I'll leave alone. But David and Solomon are condemned in the Book of Mormon as committing whoredoms with their practice of many wives and concubines. But there is nothing else. Don Bradley is forced to acknowledge there is no other corroborating teaching from Joseph Smith on the subject of polygamy other than to vehemently and unabashedly condemn the practice in all forms.
Right. You could see him feeling
that way. Someone may have been coming from one bias doesn't mean that they aren't now stuck in another bias.
I see weird omissions that
it's selective.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Like I don't think it's the most important thing in the world or something.
Right,
but I do think that it's unfortunate that maybe a lot of people, because they take that position, they end up then becoming alienated from the church because they think then that the church
Oh man,
must have gone off track.
he's talking to all of you.
Solid pattern I've seen.
Wow, that actually seems really hardcore, man. Because he's like, and this is, I just want to say this though, because this is a thing that always bothers me. It's like when you're like, if you ask a question and they can't have an answer for it, except for, yeah, but do you really want to give up on like all of this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you're like, this is fine. But like, as the fire burns brighter and hotter, eventually after like 3 of those questions that they can't answer, but are you really going to give up all of this because you have some magic underwear or something like that? You know, like those questions get deeper and deeper. They're not going to answer those questions really.
Yeah. And see, and that's an indication that they don't want the truth no matter what. I try to be very clear about saying I don't know when I don't know. I also try to be very clear when I'm offering my opinion, as opposed to when I'm sharing a detail that I believe is verifiable public record. So what I've said so far, it's like, this is verifiable public record. The one and only document that claims to be from Joseph Smith is highly suspect. The Latter-day Saints never saw it until 8 years after Joseph Smith's assassination. And it's a document that doesn't sound or read like anything Joseph Smith has ever produced.
Yeah. All right. We'll pull up a little bit more of that then. I like their intro. I think their intro. I'm a big intro guy. You didn't know.
L. Brad Whitbeck and Don Quan Bradley, the prodigal prophet of polygamy, the liturgical librarian of all likelihood and likeness, and I botched it. Anyway, we got talking about a really cool topic today, which is whether or not Joseph Smith actually practiced polygamy. Now, why is that a hot topic that would require one of the #1 scholars in Mormonism to talk about? Well, it's because there's a new movement in town. There's a new spiritual sheriff in town. And a lot of people are following this sheriff. Like a Pied Piper, he offers you 2 beautiful things. One, to liberate yourself.
Yeah.
He's not going to identify anybody as this Pied Piper. He's going to make nebulous, rather unconnected groups into this Pied Piper. That's all I wanted to say is he'll create a nefarious character, but will not identify who it is.
Yeah. So what do you think that's about? I mean, he's talked to you directly. So why isn't he just saying it's you? Or is he saying it's not you and that there's people that are worse than you and you're just asking questions?
Cardin and I, from time to time, share memes one with another. And I do try to make sure that I'm not sending the memes that are just poking fun at the things that he believes. But there's a lot of, I think there's more that unites us than disconnects us.
Same.
But there has to be a boogeyman, because here's what's happening in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints right now. It is membership falling off a cliff. I went to the most recent session of General Conference, and I've been to General Conference before, and every single time it is 100% filled to capacity. This is the first time I've been in a few years, and it is maximum 2/3 capacity filled.
Really?
Even the most at that giant conference center, even in the heart of the city of the headquarters of the church, Salt Lake City, 2/3 capacity filled. Even the most desirable seats in the facility are 3/4 filled. So, and where I live in Ogden area, the ward that I was previously in, it's an entire 3 congregations that have been distilled down to 1 congregation. I have another buddy in Salt Lake City area, an entire stake has been distilled down to 1 congregation. My grandfather, a number of years ago, lived in Chile, and Jeffrey R. Holland spent about 3 years in Chile as they took a few dozen stakes and reduced it down to just a handful of stakes. Because for years, there was the practice of just baptizing thousands upon thousands of Chileans, as well as other places in South America, who never had any understanding of the gospel. They ended up building facilities based upon baptism numbers. And so right now, the church is in free fall as far as activity in the church, and it shows big time.
But there's so many temples being built. It's crazy. Like everywhere you go, there's freaking temples. Like there's temples in every direction in California, in San Jose, in Rome. They built temples in Rome. Is that their like new plan instead of Nauvoo?
Think about the perception of success. If all of a sudden, wow, Disneyland is opening up a new theme park in this city and another theme park in this city. Wow, they must really be successful. And businesses like that, they do have to account to shareholders, and it's easier to find out when there's financial mismanagement, when there's those kind of investments. I believe we are going to see the chickens come home to roost with the building of temples and some of the changes that have happened. If you look at the just the past few years, the temples that are either under construction or recently finished, they no longer have Moroni on top of the spire.
That's a good thing to bring up. How about the Moroni falling down?
Much more generalized Christian looking, and not even any symbols anybody would directly identify as.
I mean, I've seen like 100 videos of Moroni getting struck by lightning, earthquakes, falling off cliffs, his trumpet falling out of his hands, and now that they're like, so what's up with that also? Because I mean, this is nuts. Like the amount of times like that a temple gets struck by lightning and loses its Moroni is pretty.
Let me give the most practical explanation. It is a tall spire and generally the tallest conductor of electricity in the area, so that would make sense. I do find it quite symbolic of
I can't help it.
Of the temple right next to church headquarters is where Moroni loses his trumpet. And right now, I mean, the church brags about this is going to be in a future earthquake. The temple in Salt Lake City will be the safest place. I think there's going to be that's foreshadowing what will happen to that building. I don't anticipate that it's going to last as Jesus makes his great movements.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me go back to the video for a second. So what Don Bradley does is
well, to keep going with Carden, because Carden says there's a Pied Piper who's and think about this Pied Piper. What is this Pied Piper teaching? To be faithful to your wife and don't seek after others. The same perfect example given with Adam and Eve, that the disciples of Jesus Christ would follow that pattern instead of the doctrine of many wives and concubines.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the subtitles to be brighter because that was useful. Geopolitical moves of the church. Here we go.
Surely, Russell M. Nelson telling members of the church to go get.
Oh, by the way, recent Tartarians said that that Carden was the Tim Pool of Mormon podcasts, and
milk toast, middle of the road sort of dude.
As an admittedly close and personal friend of Tim Pool, I will say that's true. It just might not be the cachet you want it to be.
The jibby jab, okay, that didn't swear.
10 seconds to press play, and I'm going to shut my mouth.
Go back 10 seconds to the.
Yeah, and then I'll give you a signal like this when I want you to pause, or I'll yell it.
Pied Piper, he offers you two beautiful things. One, to liberate yourself of the burden of polygamy, which is seen still as an oddity by your society around you. I mean, my entire adult life, I've heard jokes about me being Mormon and multiple wives and so on and so forth, okay? And also it relieves you of kind of burden of basically juxtaposing American conservatism with some of the modern geopolitical moves of the church, primarily Russell M. Nelson telling members of the church to go get the jibby jabby. Okay, that didn't square very well with people.
Oh, can I pause it? Gosh, like hold on.
He didn't tell us to go get it, but that's the way many people. And I understand that he didn't tell us to go get it, but that's the way many people felt.
He didn't tell us to go get it. Okay, like he said that the vaccine was a godsend.
Yes. So not only this, so President Nelson implemented the same exact policies as Anthony Fauci, as Klaus Schwab, as Joe Biden. In other words, these evil globalist people, they have the exact same policies. Same thing as the Pope in the Vatican. In other words, President Nelson clearly serves the same God as Klaus Schwab and Anthony Fauci. Clearly. President Nelson says the God that he serves sent the vaccine. And all we have to do is look back behind the curtain a little bit and realize, oh, the same God that sent the vaccine is the same God who created the disease. In other words, he didn't. Now, this much is true. This is how Carden technically says things that are true. There was no mandate by way of President Nelson to get the vaccine, but there was heavy-handed tactics, including much shame and closing down churches and having the local leaders implement their satanic lockdown policies. And Carden wants to pretend. He wants to pretend like President Nelson is not serving the same God as the Pope and Anthony Fauci and Klaus Schwab. But his refusal to simply acknowledge the thing that members of the church care about is the reason why membership is in free fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, and zoom in on that handshake. Take a look at the Pope. Oh, that index finger extended. Has it a name? It has. Will you give it to me?
So this is my interest in this whole idea of going to Rome, right? Because Rome is such an interesting place to take over, and for them to be building these temples, which it seems like if they actually believe that they're useful for something, it has to be for this purpose that they're using it for. But okay, the other thing is just the idea of like polygamy, that they all looked at each other like, they were survivors of the Holocaust because people made fun of Mormons for having polygamous wives or something like that. I don't know. Is that real? Because like everywhere, I would imagine, like, first off, I know plenty of kids who've come from polygamous families in California. It's not that weird. So is it really that weird to people? Also, like the Muslims have polygamous families. Like, why is it so freaking weird to them that they feel like, and it seems like society is going towards polygamy. So are they just waiting for that to become like legal again? What do you think?
I'm totally comfortable with the idea of God's church being at odds with Christianity in general. So I've never had an issue with the Mormons practice polygamy when the rest of Christianity abandons it. No problem with that principle. But that's probably the main reason why is Christianity in general has rejected the idea of polygamy. Now, in recent years, as I've dived into it from a spiritual aspect, saying, hey, I want to know from God what his standards are regarding one wife or many wives, and in what situation there might be anything other than what he presented to us in the example of Adam and Eve. I think it's because the Mormons very clearly were practicing this doctrine of many wives and concubines, and it set up so much inequality. So what's happening right now with the hookup culture in the United States and throughout the entire Western world is that a few chads at the very top are banging all the chicks, and women on a much larger scale are no longer marriage material. They're either not interested in it. Men that are interested in families don't want the kind of women that are now part of the let's just try to attract these high value chads at the top who will just use them and abuse them. Brigham Young was teaching from the pulpit in the name of the Lord that if a man has a higher priesthood, a woman can leave her husband for that man and doesn't need a bill of divorcement. Those are the kind of doctrines that Brigham Young, as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, would teach from the pulpit in the name of the Lord.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could watch a bit more of the video, or we could also walk just through some of this idea of the history of it, however you want to go.
Well, let me give you a couple of plays. Oh, you know what? Keep going a little bit more on the video. We're going to do probably the first 2 minutes total.
This is how we do reaction videos. We watch about 30 seconds of it over 2 hours.
I was going to say his cousin has been baptized in these organizations. And let me just finish my intro. Okay. These organizations are gaining popularity because they liberate people of some of the two hardest pills to swallow in Mormonism as of late. And they do it by saying Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy. It was actually an ideation and invention of number two, Brigham Young and his.
Okay.
There's no group that I know of that says Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy because it's their invention. Joseph Smith says, I have never had any wife except for my wife, Emma Hale Smith. And as president of the church and Hiram Smith as co-president of the church, they, at an increasing ferocity, sought to stamp out polygamy in all forms with undeniable. If you find anybody teaching any form of this doctrine, you kick them out from among you. Right. You do not bid them Godspeed. Not only would they declare it publicly, they would make sure that it's published in the church newspaper. So the president and co-president of the church, namely Joseph and Hiram Smith, said they have never practiced polygamy, and that it is an abomination the way the Book of Mormon teaches. So in other words, for Cardin to frame it as, oh, these groups are starting to say something, no. These are the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints until Joseph Smith was assassinated and the polygamists took over.
And it infers a lot, because if there's a group of people that are inventing something, it's different than a group of people that have already been doing something and are trying to figure out a way to keep doing it. Yeah. So we talk about Mormons versus Moor.
All along.
Well, there's the Moorish, the Mormons, the Islamic people. Again, like there are groups of people, and they're probably in the Celts, and God only knows what was going on in Belgium, and there's groups of Europeans that came to America. I mean, it seems like there were a lot, and there are traveling salesman fathers with polygamous families outside of Mormonism. So it's if that supplanted itself into a religion that rejected it, and then that took over the religion, I mean, that it's pretty plausible. that could happen. As if enough people were kicked out for being polygamous, they would be quiet about it, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So that's Carden's first thing that says, okay, this Pied Piper, this nebulous Pied Piper has one thing. People have such a hard.
Weird how he says it like Pied Piper is a bad thing. Isn't Pied Piper the hero? I mean, it is to me.
In other words, it's somebody who's attracting a movement, this nebulous attracting movement, because people have an issue with polygamy. They're making it an issue. Okay. Yeah. As if teaching what Joseph Smith taught on the subject is in any way anti-Mormon.
We're going to have to run through the Pied Piper for a second. I'm just going to have to do this because, I mean, that metaphor, like, if you're going to use a metaphor, like, make it right. Like, so here's the thing. If he might have used the perfect metaphor. Here's the story of a man who saves a town from the plague. There are rats, and then people are dying, and the parents are like, we got to save our children. So and the children aren't even being fed, and etc. So then he goes and he plays music and he gets rid of all the rats. And he's supposed to get paid, and the parents refuse to pay him. And he notices the children are not well taken care of. So he just takes the children with them, and they go off to a place where they're going to be happily ever after and safe, right? That's the version that I'm understanding. It's not that they're going to like a horrible place.
Yeah.
It's they're being separated from bad parents.
I think Carden's intention is to indicate there's people playing an enticing tune to lead people away. I think that's the extent of his intention. So that's the first one. Oh, because polygamy is a difficult issue, people are giving enticing messages.
Well, all right. What's the second part?
His cohorts that wanted it. Ideation and invention of number 2, Brigham Young, and his cohorts that wanted it, and they teamed up with Joseph Smith, they killed him, and they ushered it in afterwards. So if you come and believe with us, you no longer have to bear the burden of polygamy. And it's a solid pitch that I can see people being attracted to and looking into. But here to figure out whether or not it's true or not.
Okay, so you want to say with the Brigham Young part, or is that pretty much?
So in other words, here's what's really clear. If Joseph Smith was teaching polygamy, even Don Bradley acknowledges this in this conversation. Joseph Smith was painting himself, and I'll just even give the timestamp for this one. It's not like we have to open it up. 32 minutes and 50 seconds in, Don Bradley specifically says, everyone agrees that if Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy, he was trying to.
Sorry.
Go to 32:50 and press play.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Study of this is controversial. Life agrees that if Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy, that he would have had to been trying to keep it secret, right? He's publicly denying it and so on.
Okay,
so
press
if
pause.
you're trying to keep it.
So in other words, this is another way to where they frame it in a way that I do not find accurate at all. And I don't think there's any way that Don Bradley is accidentally mischaracterizing it. Joseph Smith vehemently denied polygamy and condemned it in all forms. So yes, if he was practicing it, he was trying to keep it a secret, but also Joseph Smith was a flat-out liar and hypocrite by teaching one set of doctrines while practicing another. The original section 101 in the 1835 edition of the Book of Commandments is, inasmuch as this church has been charged with the crimes of fornication and polygamy, using those two terms synonymously, fornication and polygamy, we hereby declare that we believe that any man should have but one wife, and any woman but one husband, except in the case of death, which either would be at liberty to marry again. That was the doctrine of the church regarding polygamy. Not only that, but in the current section 42 of Doctrine and Covenants, this is the law of the Lord given to the Latter-day Saints. That was like how it was understood, section 42. And among the commandments is, cleave unto thy wife, singular.
Right.
And it's the same commandment from the beginning of Adam and Eve. Cleave unto your wife and none else. So that was the established doctrine of the church. So the way that Carden Ellis and Don Bradley paint Joseph Smith is that he would secretly marry teenage girls and married women. Don Bradley even makes the case that Joseph Smith was marrying women 7 and 8 months pregnant.
Yeah. That's the funny one, I find, like, because he's marrying people that aren't his wives. Yeah.
In other words, and he does this by examining the historical record. Oh, at the time of the sealing, this woman was 8 months pregnant. That's evidence that Joseph Smith wasn't having sex with the women he was marrying. It's like, hey, Don Bradley, Is there any possibility that it's evidence that they made up the narrative about him marrying other women? Because
it's pretty weird.
Well, think about this. I would ask of Cardinal Ellis, in what situation would you be agreeable to have your 8-month pregnant wife marry another man? And she explains to you, oh, it's not for this life. It's just when we're dead, I'm going to be married to him, not you. Yeah, Cardinal Ellis, when would you ever agree to something like that? I mean,
it's also strange because they're saying that the point is he had to do polygamy so bad that he had to cheat at it and like marry people that he wasn't actually married to. That were already, it's just like, it's such a weird idea. Like he's like, I hated doing this so bad.
Here's what I have seen enough. I've seen enough to where people want to believe that they are right with God, that they'll start making up doctrines from God to justify their behavior. So I would understand that, like if Joseph Smith was a charlatan, that kind of behavior makes sense. If he was a man sanctified by God, he needs to live the standards that God sets and not be a hypocrite.
You want to do are you able to do a run through? Because like a lot of people are like, wait, what? Joseph Smith didn't do all that stuff? Like, what about his wives? Like, there's a list. If you go through this, like, you know, Wikipedia, it says he's married to like a bazillion ladies, right?
Yeah, and here's what to start doing. In other words, we can look at a list at Wikipedia, and by and large, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints says, yes, this list is accurate. My brother used to work at the church office building. He actually looked up the records for Joseph Smith Jr., the first president of the church, and it lists 30 plus wives having been sealed to him. Now, when you take a look at that list, well, where do we get it from? It is from decades after the death of Joseph Smith.
Can we also acknowledge that a lot of them ended up married to Brigham Young? I'm just saying, like, it's like, what? Come on.
There's two men. I forget what the percentage is. It's like 75% or more of the women who claim to have been married to Joseph Smith are the wives of two men, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. And Heber C. Kimball is verified having impregnated a married woman. Before Joseph was assassinated. So there's those kinds of big scandals that would be incentive to where, wow, we can't get found out and excommunicated from the church, because Joseph had already established a solid following, even the mayor of a city. There's power that there's at least incentive to take over. Yeah, and you would think somebody like Joseph Smith would get a better looking lady than that. I don't know.
I don't know how late it is in time. Some of these are all right. Brigham Young, I can see stealing some of these women.
Yeah. And it's not like you get to take 10 selfies and pick the best one.
Right. But no, I mean, it is interesting, this idea that, okay, so
let me give a little bit of rundown of where the list of wives comes from. It was years after Joseph Smith was already assassinated. There was one case in particular where the Salt Lake City church was having a legal dispute with the reorganized church regarding the temple lot in Missouri. And one of the legal case being made by the Salt Lake City church is the reorganized church didn't even know Joseph Smith. They were already departed from him because Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy. They didn't even know about it. And look at these affidavits from women saying, we really, really were married to Joseph Smith. We hereby certify in this affidavit. Now,
that's their big argument, is they say that women said that they were.
Look at the facsimile of these affidavits. There's two sets of handwriting making hand copies. So in other words, there was it seems most likely two people sitting down at a table together, hand making copies of we hereby certify that we are married, and then there's signatures that go on top of that. We don't know if those women knew what they were signing. We do know that some of them who were asked about it in court literally fell apart upon examination, and the judge did not believe this case that was being made of Joseph Smith being a polygamist. So that list of wives comes primarily from the documents of the temple lot case.
Okay, so what's the first one though? Who's the little girl? 14-year-old?
So the claim is that in about 1829,
Fanny Alger.
Excuse me. In about 1835, 29-year-old Joseph Smith secretly married 14-year-old Fanny Alger and then kicked her out of the house shortly after his wife Emma found out. And that is now the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the anonymous historians who produced the essays for the church. They are forced to acknowledge the essay starts off that section with fragmentary evidence suggests that Joseph Smith married Fanny Alger. In other words, they themselves are not willing to say that Joseph Smith was ever married to Fanny Alger. The closest that they get in the official church essays, fragmentary evidence suggests. That's their level of confidence that the anonymous historians have.
So it's, and then again, who is the guy, you know, like the book on the polygamy, the 3-book series on polygamy?
Ron Caron on Joseph Smith fought polygamy, I believe.
Yeah. So just the idea of Joseph Smith having this 15, 14-year-old girl in his house, and then there's a letter about it, but it's been scraped out. It used to say scrape, and now it says affair. So
yes,
someone's removed the word.
I believe it was a letter from. So there was an accusation from Oliver Cowdery regarding Joseph Smith, and it refers to the nasty scrape. Yeah, a letter.
Right.
A letter, the nasty scrape involving Joseph Smith, and that term scrape was scratched out and then changed to affair, as in it could be a business affair, but that's used as evidence of Joseph being married, even though scrape does not imply marriage.
No, it even maybe implies like an affair in the sense of not a marriage, but like somehow this is a girl living in his house. So what they're suggesting is he was having, you know, relationships, like sexual relationships,
or
not celestial.
Here's what it also could be. So in other words, that's one possibility. Another possibility, what was she owed money that she wasn't paid? We don't know.
Right.
But those who are trying desperately to establish the position that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, they have to pretend that that's evidence of polygamy when it's just as validly evidence of some other dispute inside of the home.
And again, even if it is sexual, then that's example of adultery, not polygamy. Polygamy is a specific, especially with celestial marriage as a ritual.
And Don Bradley makes the case in that conversation to where there's other examples of impropriety and even bad behavior among men that are considered prophets in the scriptures. No, Joseph Smith is somebody different. This is somebody that we claim is the prophet of the restoration. And like unto Moses, he was tasked with the gathering of Israel and bringing all those who were called to establish Zion and usher in the second coming.
Some people are just special.
Yeah, so it's not a matter of like some of the children of Israel who think they're sleeping with a harlot when really it's their sister-in-law. It's not those sort of situations. In other words, it is reasonable to expect moral sanctity from a man who claims to have communed with Jehovah.
Okay, so after Fanny Alger, who's the, like, when we think of like he's getting married to somebody?
Okay, so after Fanny Alger, after the claims of Fanny Alger being his wife, the next claim from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is 1938, beginning with Louisa Beeman. And I would recommend for anybody to look up, if you just type into YouTube, Hemlock Knots, Knots, Hemlock Knots, Louisa Beeman. They give a great breakdown regarding her and how the claims really do fall apart. So that's the first wife that they claim. And in between 1838 and 1944, Joseph Smith is claimed to have married between 30 and 40 different women, including multiple teenage girls and married women. And according to Don Bradley, Joseph Smith was actively marrying at least 2 women who were in their 3rd trimester pregnancies.
And yeah, okay, so this the other thing is this is before they had genetic testing. So now that we have genetic testing, there's none of these people have kids with Joseph Smith.
Yes.
What is going on? None of them.
In other words, it's a statistical rather impossibility.
All of them have kids.
Yes. And so the people
all of them have kids, not from him, but they have them.
And it's undoubtedly that Joseph Smith is fertile, having impregnated his wife Emma at least 9 different times.
Right. Which doesn't seem to work out very well for those kids.
His soldiers are swimming. He's a healthy male. And many of these women, if not the majority of those women, are in the prime years for reproducing.
And socially, you'd rather be a wife than a concubine, you know. So you're going to try to be a mother.
And especially when there's people trying to distort what the scriptures say, just open up to my screen real quick.
Yeah.
So this is Jacob chapter 2, and Jacob in the Book of Mormon lays the smackdown regarding their pursuing riches, and then he says, if all I had to talk to you was your pride in pursuing riches, I'd be a happy man, but I have to talk to you about something far worse. You're trying to do what was done by David and Solomon with many wives and concubines. I will not suffer you to do verse 24, behold, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines. Let me just give you a reminder that Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, is the principle and doctrine of many wives and concubines. Jacob, the high priest after the holy order of God, says what David and Solomon did is an abomination. Whoever the God is of section 132 says, this is my doctrine, many wives and concubines. Okay, so David and Solomon are called out for their abominations of many wives and concubines, and specifically told, you're not going to do like the people in Jerusalem. I'm going to lead you out with monogamy so you can establish a righteous branch. In other words, how is God going to raise up seed according to this verse? By not doing the abominations of David and Solomon. Now, as we go to verse 30, the Lord says, if I'm going to raise up seed unto me, I will command my people to live this law of monogamy. Otherwise, they hearken unto the abominations of David and Solomon. Now, people will twist the scriptures and contort them to meet their whorish minds and say, we're justified in practicing polygamy. Look, this is the loophole verse. Nope. In verse 24, he says, you will not do the abominations of David and Solomon. And in other words, he tells them, you're going to raise up a righteous branch. How will the Lord raise up seed unto him? With the commandment of, just like in section 42, cleave unto your wife and none else. Stop breaking your wives' hearts. And that's some of the symbology in Jeremiah, who's a contemporary with Lehi in the Book of Mormon. The Lord says, he's given the symbology of, why have you abandoned me, the wife of your youth, and you've gone chasing after these false gods, these whores of these false gods. He uses that symbology because it's so heartbreaking. Jacob is saying, don't break your wives' hearts. And it becomes obvious that Brigham Young, John Taylor, Heber C. Kimball, they broke their wives' hearts. The wives of their youth, they did the same abominations and they broke their hearts. And I want to point out, this was prophesied by Jesus Christ in the Book of Mormon regarding a group of Gentiles that would receive the fullness of the gospel and what they would do instead when they receive the fullness of the gospel. Jesus Christ says, thus commandeth the Father that I should say unto you, at that day, and those three words, at that day, it's consistent throughout the Book of Mormon and throughout the Old Testament. It's referring to the end times. When the Gentiles shall sin against my gospel and shall reject the fullness of my gospel and be lifted up in the pride of their hearts above all nations and above all the people of the whole earth, and shall be filled with all manner of lyings. Polygamy requires lying. Even as Don Bradley tries to excuse Joseph Smith, he does so by turning him to a deceitful liar. All manner of lyings, deceits, mischiefs, all manner of hypocrisy. Is there anything more hypocritical than saying, I have one wife, Emma, really there's about 30 or 40 more, but please don't look behind the curtain. All manner of hypocrisy and murders and priestcrafts and whoredoms. Now, Joseph Smith would refer to polygamy as whoredoms and secret abominations. If they, the Gentiles with the fullness of the gospel, shall do all those things and reject the fullness of the gospel, behold, saith the Father, I will bring the fullness of my gospel from among them. It's going to be taken away. And I just want to make sure that I verify how this was taken away.
Also, just to back that up, Corinthians, right? No, not you, the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Neither the fornicators, adulterers, effeminate, abusers. Keep going.
Yeah, and so it's very clear in the New Testament as well. The reason that I refer to the Book of Mormon is because this is what holds Latter-day Saints accountable. People like Don Bradley try to use their expertise in the historical record saying, we just want to know what really happened. It's like, hey, have you ever read your scriptures on this subject, Don Bradley?
Well, actually, Auntie Queenie was just asking about the same thing, right? Like, what about the D&C entry? I mean, I don't want to skip ahead, but the angel with the flaming sword commanding Joseph Smith to establish polygamy, right?
Here's what's interesting: if you go to the church essays on polygamy, and when it talks about an angel with a flaming sword, when you simply follow the original source, like follow the original source every single time, it's from 30 or 40 years after Joseph's death, from people who would never have any clue. One of the sources that they used on that, saying there's 3 different sources claiming Joseph Smith was confronted by a sword-wielding angel. One of them says that it was a flaming sword. One of those sources is Joseph F. Smith, who would have been 9 years old at the time of his uncle Joseph's assassination. Why would President and Uncle Joseph be telling his 9-year-old nephew, I really did have to take those extra wives because a sword-wielding angel says, I'm going to chop off your head if you don't.
Fun fact, I just got to do it. Like, so you know about Uriel? So like, if you look, we talked about Enoch. I think you said, do you ask if I read Enoch? Was that you? Okay. So like, you think about Uriel, right? Because Uriel is this flame and sworded kind of trans angel, right? Could be boy, girl, angel. And they're in charge of Yaldabaoth, which is, according to the Gnostics, it's like the evil demiurge that is kind of in charge of the world, right? So it's this thing that you would imagine making kind of these evil promises to and with is under the control of this flaming sworded angel. So in a weird way, it tracks. It just tracks the wrong direction. You don't want to go down that road.
This strength, like Don Bradley and Cardin Ellis, who are trying to promote this insane narrative regarding Joseph Smith, they have to create this God who forces people to obey him. Like if Joseph Smith had the commandment to obey polygamy and he wouldn't, he would be removed from his place. But instead, they end up creating this God who says, I'm going to send my sword-wielding angel. You marry that girl or else.
I got another one real quick. Okay, let's do the engram real quick. So engram is how you find out words usages over time. Google will take a word and study all the books written out. So here's polygamy. Polygamy is not super popular. You get to the 15th century. It gets a little boom in the 1600s with the libertine movement, right? The fall of the kingdom. But then you get to Babazoom. Once you start getting to the colonial American Nova Atlantis period, there's a jump and then boom, right? 1780 is when you start hearing about polygamy the most. It's actually more than you do into the 1820s. So it's interesting because all of a sudden there's a huge jump in the interest of polygamy in the United States in the generations right before Joseph Smith, as if to say that there's probably a number of polygamists that are living in the United States by the point of 1780 to the new right? This is 1776. And they're talking about what they want. These are Freemasons who want free love, free society. This is a pretty important point. And then once it gets down to here, you see this is like the drop-off point by the 1900s because, of course, polygamy becomes illegal. But then you can follow adultery. Adultery in the 1650s, right before the 1700s, it drops off by the time that they're starting to talk more and more about polygamy. Adultery is the focus point, though, of Christianity during this point. They're like, hey, here's the problem with all of this marriage. I mean, this is becoming progressively more of an issue. And then you see it kind of scale across. The last one I want to show is bigamy, because bigamy then becomes the major focus point. And it already was rather large when you had men marrying other wives and they're being arrested for it. But at a certain point in the 1850s on, right, bigamy becomes the next thing until it peters out into right now. All right. I don't know. I don't want to do polyamory. Let's just go on to Jacob.
So let me give you a couple of things of what happened. So, well, you know what? Let's go back to the Cardin Ellis, because he already pointed out the Pied Piper who's saying because people have an issue with polygamy, people are telling them things that they like to hear. Like Joseph Smith wasn't a polygamist. Now he's going to point out one other thing. So, and this is about 3 minutes into that video as he's just setting up the introduction.
All right, hold on a second. Oh, by the way, have you ever done the gematria of your name? Did you know that in Jewish simple gematria,
smart stuff just by listening to you. What is the gematria of Jacob?
Oh, see, because you know the numerology of letters. So if you remove the vowels, Jacob in simple gematria is 31. But did you know that Bell in simple gematria is 31? So did you know that Jacob is Bell? Oh, sorry, I couldn't help. My Zionist friends are gonna love that one. So here's a 3-minute in thing.
It was actually an ideation and invention of number 2, Brigham Young, and his core hooker words. So if you come and believe with us, you no longer have to bear the burden of. But here to figure out whether or not it's true or not is the book, Lost 116 pages, and tell us a little bit more about polygamy. Whether or not
he already talked about the jib. So in other words, here's what Cardin Ellis is referring to. These people are trying to get these conservatives who have issues with President Nelson promoting the vaccination. No, here's the reality. What has started up is thousands of Latter-day Saints, the most faithful that you'll ever find, are going through the spiritual process of realizing all's not well in Zion. The Book of Mormon warns us all's not well in Zion, and they're paying the price to get answers for themselves. In other words, let me just point out some of the stuff to where the Book of Mormon tells quite directly the status of the church today. Right now, I'm opening up just the Book of Mormon, Mormon chapter 8. And I think it starts in like verse 30 something. Let me find it. Library, Gospel Library. And so Cardinellis is saying these people that are insinuating that the church is in apostasy, it's like, dude, read your damn scriptures, Cardin. It's like it's like you literally have the prophets of the scriptures calling to you from the dust, the way that Jesus Christ says that they will be. And there's no message in the Book of Mormon that says you're going to have men in the last days that tell you stuff from pulpits and teleprompters. No, it says that these people from the scriptures are going to call to you Latter-day Saints from the dust and try to save you from the destruction that you're about to incur. I'm going Mormon chapter 8. And this is the chapter where Moroni takes over from his dad, Mormon. And he starts off by saying, I'm taking over the works of my dad because he's dead now. Oh, and he gives one more emphasis. Search the prophecies of Isaiah. So this is Moroni, the last prophet of the Book of Mormon, saying, search Isaiah. When you got Haney reading from the pulpit on behalf of President Nelson, unlike classic cars and comic books, the teachings of old prophets don't have greater value with time. It's like, you're full of crap, Haney, reading from his teleprompter. The prophets of the Book of Mormon, Jesus Christ himself, say, search the prophecies of Isaiah, because Isaiah chapter 1 says the Lord's covenant people in ancient Israel were apostate, just like the covenant people among the Gentiles of the last day will be apostate. That's why he tells you read Isaiah. Okay, let me go to the money shot verses. Oh my goodness, it says, it shall come in a day when the power of God shall be denied, and churches become defiled and lifted up in the pride of their hearts. Yea, even in a day when leaders of the churches and teachers will rise up in the pride of their hearts, even unto the envying of them who belong to their churches. Okay. Wars, rumors of wars, pollutions upon all the face of the earth. O ye wicked and stiff-necked. Okay. Here we go. Let's go to this one. So Moroni says, I speak unto you, Latter-day Saint Gentiles, as if you were present. And yet ye, Latter-day Saint Gentiles, are not. But behold, Jesus Christ has shown you unto me. And I know you're doing. I know that you walk in the pride of your hearts, and there is none save a few only who do not lift themselves up in the pride of their hearts unto the wearing of very fine apparel. And I would just, you can pull up right now any video or picture of people walking into General Conference and tell me, do you ever see gatherings of people dressed nicer? Possibly when they go to the Oscars and other things where they put on tuxedos. But General Conference is some of the finest twined linens that you're ever going to find among a group of people.
Oh yeah, I wore silk suits, man.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's also kind of the sadness of society. Like, most people are just medieval peasants wearing tunics now. So there's not a lot of, like, it's become a uniform, which is weird. It didn't need to be that way originally.
And so here's Moroni's continued message to the Latter-day Saints. Ye do love your money and your substance and your fine apparel and the adorning of your churches more than you love the needy, the sick and afflicted. And it becomes very obvious what the church does with the almost unimaginable amounts of wealth that they have acquired. And Moroni says to the Latter-day Saints, O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites, ye teachers who sell yourselves for that which will canker, why have you polluted the holy church of God? Why are you ashamed to take upon you the name of Christ? Now, Cardin talks about this Doctrine of Christ group, and they're just trying to teach that that the church has gone astray. No. The Book of Mormon says exactly what has happened. Jesus Christ says exactly what has happened. Isaiah says exactly what has happened, and Jesus Christ says, search Isaiah because it represents you. The very first chapter of the Book of Mormon, what happens to the Lord's people? They're so apostate while being religious that they're about to be destroyed. And so what's happening in the church is thousands of members are waking up and repenting. They're saying, because here's what the Doctrine of Christ is. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not teach how to receive the baptism of fire and of the Holy Ghost. And I offer this as a challenge to Cardin or Don Bradley. Can you find me the testimony of any current member of the Q15 where they say, this is how I received the baptism of fire and of the Holy Ghost, by which I spoke with the tongue of angels and became sealed as a son of Jesus Christ. Zero of them give such a testimony. It's because they do not teach Jesus Christ's doctrine. And Jesus Christ becomes so vehemently jealous in saying, this is my doctrine. Faith, repentance, water baptism, receive the gift of the Holy Ghost, endure to the end. If anybody teaches you more or less than that and says it's my doctrine, they come of evil and the gates of hell are ready to swallow them. That's the message of Jesus Christ in the Book of Mormon. And that's what's happening to members of the church. It's not that, oh, we have issues with the jibby jab. Nope. It has exclusively to do with faith in Jesus Christ and not living a watered down false doctrine.
You know, I don't want to go too personal, right, into your
Bam!
Right, exactly. That felt strong, and it made me also realize, like, when you're thinking about Revelation, because of how it's a channeled thing. I mean, do you dream a lot? Do you have a lot of dreams?
Yeah. So I've had dreams since I was really young, and in recent years, since 2020, there's been a steady uptick in dreams, which teach me things.
And you don't really, like, you're sober, but, like, was there ever a point where you drank or anything?
When I was
like,
a teenager, and occasionally now I'll have a beer or two.
Did you have a hard time dreaming afterwards? Like, do you forget your dreams when that happens? Like, when
No, I don't remember dreams whenever I have drank.
Right.
But as soon as I started writing down my dreams and being diligent at that, I would have more. And I've recorded a podcast episode where I related a couple of the most poignant dreams from the Lord.
I gotta watch that. So for me, though, it's when I used to drink, I didn't really dream, and as soon as I'm sober, it's like crazy all the time dreams, and like I even during the day, and so this is the thing: people have the opportunity to numb and tune out reality, and most people are doing that because it's so intense. I think it's probably easier to tune it out. And just even your dreams. Like, I get why people want to smoke pot and just not remember their dreams, right?
And dreams do so much. Lehi in the Book of Mormon, it was in a dream that the Lord says, get out of Jerusalem. I'm going to take you to a land that's going to be blessed for you and your posterity. What Joseph, who was the steward of earthly Jesus, that he looked like the earthly father of Jesus. It was in dreams that he was told, get out of this place. They're seeking the life of your child. And it was in a different dream that the angel came to him saying, it's safe to go back now. So yeah, the Lord uses dreams to instruct people that listen to him.
I think I told you right about my dream I had a few weeks ago.
I don't think so. Hit me.
No, remind me to tell you another time. But with the Urim and Thummim stones, right? Like, this is a major thing with the Cohen and the Aaronic priesthood. All these priests, the whole thing is like they have to be sober. They're picking up revelation. Yeah. People think that like the magic rocks is like a Mormon thing. It's a Jewish thing. It's like it comes from the Urim and Thummim or Tahun, whatever. These are the stones that they use.
There's so much, there's things that I don't understand regarding the physical objects on the earth and how they might relate to connecting with heaven. But
Darth Vader knew clearly because he wore this.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Now, one thing that has been really clear to me has been since I started exercising daily, my spiritual connection has improved dramatically. So there's a lot to do with maintaining our physical health and being able to tune in spiritually with the heavens.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, but also the scare is picking up on the right. So, I mean, we're talking right now about this idea that there's one thing that's telling you, love each other, do what's right, work together, manifest and alchemy. And there's another thing that's saying, like, I'm a jealous, angry thing, and I'm going to kill anybody, and I'm a violent, like, rageful thing. But people are worshiping both. There's like people that are picking up on the one signal, and there's people that are picking up on the other signal. There might be more than that, but at least I'm noticing that there seems to be fire in the building.
Yeah. Very much
so. Do you want to pull up another verse here, or should I go to the
go to 32 minutes 50 seconds because Don Bradley makes a claim there. Yeah. 30. No, first let's go there. Let's go here. 30 minutes and 55 seconds.
30 minutes 55. Okay.
Through the studies, it matches Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball majority and only matches Joseph Smith minimally. That's what I've heard. Well, it was like a 90s, a study was done.
I've never heard of that at all. So,
Okay.
so I have looked at. I'm not thinking of the woman's name. There was someone decades ago who did a detailed analysis. I would. I'd be willing to put forward a challenge to the skeptics who question whether Joseph Smith gave D&C 132.
Challenge accepted.
And that is, if we could identify some sort of expert in style, literary style, right?
Oh my gosh, I
not
can't.
someone who already takes a position on this, maybe someone from outside of the.
Come on, I don't take a position on this, but I can identify the literary style because I read so much Brigham Young. I read the Adam God theory and all of the Brigham Young letters. Like,
okay, so open. I'm in section 132 right now, and I just want to point out that Don Bradley is making the case for the principle and doctrine of many wives and concubines. And so take a look at this and tell me if anybody can find anything from the writings of Joseph Smith that sounds like this. And verily I say unto you that the conditions of this law are these: all covenants, contracts, bonds, obligations, oaths, vows, performances, connections, associations, or expectations that are not made and entered into and sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise of him who is anointed, both as well for time and for all eternity, and that too most holy, by revelation and commandment through the medium of mine anointed, whom I have appointed on earth to hold this power, and I have appointed unto my servant Joseph to hold this power in the last days, and there is never but one on the earth at a time on whom this power and the keys of this priesthood are conferred, are of no efficacy, virtue, or force in and after the resurrection from the dead. For all contracts that are not made unto this end have an end when men are dead.
all right, well, that sounds a little like Brigham Young, but really it sounds like the devil, because it's the devil's in the details, and that's like a lawyer wrote that. Have you seen Santa Claus?
Because, well, think about this now. Nephi, when he's given his commentary on Isaiah, he does acknowledge it's difficult for my people to understand Isaiah, and he gives multiple chapters in a row of commentary, but he says, I'm telling this to you.
Melissa, you're good.
Yeah, I'm telling this to you too simple for you to err, E-R-R, for you to make a mistake.
Or
for
many.
I delight in plainness. In other words, was that verse easy to understand? I'm a savvy enough muchacho with a lot of experience in the scriptures. This is not clear. From what I understand, unless somebody follows this doctrine, they cannot have marriage that goes on beyond this life. Now, one thing that I will point out, you cannot find even once Jesus Christ, any of his apostles, or any of his prophets ever suggesting to somebody, aren't you worried about whether you're going to be married after this life? And that's like everything that the missionaries are armed with to say, like, oh, we have something unique. Your family can be together. Why was that not a concern of any of the Jaredites, any of the Nephites, any of the people of the New Testament, or any of the people of the Old Testament? Again, they're identifying a separate doctrine from the one taught by Jesus Christ and his authorized servants.
Paul did some weird stuff. I know he might have been like, he might have been Tom Cruise in the religion, but I don't know. I just wanted to also point out, like, Brigham Young quote, "Shall I tell you the law of God in regard to the African race? If the white man were to belong to the chosen seed, mixes his seed with the seed of Cain, the penalty under the law of God." There's certain ways that Brigham Young,
in other words,
alliterates, right? He talks about penalties of law. He loves that.
Yeah, and he teaches this from the pulpit as if it is directly from God's mouth. So now, on one of my discussions on Midnight Mormons, which is now Ward Radio, they all throw Brigham Young under the bus. They say, yeah, we've repented of what Brigham Young taught. What they're saying is, we don't care what the president of the church taught from the pulpit in the name of the Lord for 30 plus years.
Dude, the song is so good. Brigham Young. Brigham Young did nothing wrong. Yeah, good job, Colabite. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he did.
Maybe he did.
They throw him under the bus, though. You're right. So this is a weird thing. So what's the deal then? If you're like, okay, so Joseph Smith, liar, hiding what he's doing. But Brigham Young, super crazy. Everything he said, not doctrine, just theory. Like, where do you go from there, right?
Think about what Cardin Ellis and Don Bradley are doing to drive people out of the church. We want you to believe in a version of Joseph Smith where he's a liar and a fornicator, but still in good favor with
Yeah,
God.
if someone did that to Jesus, it'd be a big deal, right? Like that would be like, we're turning Jesus into an ascended master, but he's like still got it. It'd be really hard for a lot of people. I don't know. And it's kind of weird because where does that take the church in the future? Because then you've got this building that they're doing rituals in that don't matter because they're all about vaccinations anyway. I mean, we're running out of reasons.
Let's go to 32 minutes, 50 seconds into that video.
Brigham Young did nothing wrong. 32 minutes and 50 seconds. Hold on a second.
32 minutes.
Colabite will just get songs stuck in my head. It's like I can listen to the general conference if it's got like a vaporwave track behind it. Here we go.
Practice secret. You're not documenting it well, right? Like that's the idea. You don't
go back just about 10 seconds and begin it.
One reason why Joseph Smith's polygamy during his lifetime is not as well documented as we would like is that everybody agrees that if Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy, that he would have had to have been trying to keep it secret, right? He's publicly denying it and so on. So if you're trying to keep a practice secret, you're not documenting it well, right? Like that's the idea. You don't have a reason to be documenting it. It's at this time, it's illegal under Illinois law. You don't want to create documents that are going to leave a paper trail for prosecution or something, right?
Yeah, okay, there you go.
So the Doctrine and Covenants, I think it's section, what is it, 114? I'm forgetting which section it is, but Michelle Brady Stone did a wonderful breakdown of this to where the sealing is taught plainly in the Doctrine and Covenants. It is the doctrine of keeping records on earth that are honored in heaven. Tell me if you're still with me. It's frozen on me. You hear me?
Yeah, I do. I'm just trying to look up is it DNC 132 or something like that?
I think it's 114. I'll have to find it from Michelle Brady Stone because she did a wonderful episode on it. But Joseph Smith taught in Doctrine and Covenants, this doctrine of sealing is to keep records on earth that are honored in heaven. And so by Don Bradley admitting that there's no records regarding these sealings, he is by admission saying Joseph Smith was not sealed to these women, not according to the scriptures given to the Latter-day Saints.
Right. Yeah. Again, not polygamy,
so
adultery.
Don Bradley dismissively says, "Do these people read their scriptures?" Like freaking Don Bradley.
Okay, you look frozen to me. I don't know what it is.
You look frozen to me, and I must look frozen to you. Let me do this real quick. Can you banter for about 2 minutes while I exit and re-enter?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it's gonna work for me to show the video I want to show. Can I even get away with that? Probably can't. How about this? Let's go to what do I got for you right here? Origins of Latter-day Saint polygamy. We'll do that for a second. So, I mean, oh, he's back. Are you there?
I hear you the whole time. I'm going to try to exit out, and then I'm going to enter back in.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, so looking at this idea of like Mormon polygamy, I think you got to go back a little bit further. So you go to the utopian socialist movement, which is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, the first utopian socialist movements. And so everybody wanted to do this idea of building, and we talked about this with the Tartaria period, finding places, and this is what happened with like New Harmony, finding places that were already established and purchasing them and taking them over. So there are a lot of these kind of foundry societies that emerge. And in America, right, as you can see from the engram, free love, polyamory, polygamy, non-marriage becomes really popular in the United States. And the Mateus movement and different groups are saying, we're not going to get married. In fact, we'll just and it doesn't work, right? None of these societies actually take off. They last for about 50 years and then they disappear. The thing about that, though, is we don't know if they failed of their own accord, because so many of these societies were destroyed from outside influences. I mean, there are examples where it's like, it's obviously strange for people to not be married, and they would group together and they end up back the way they came. I mean, this is something like Robert Anton Wilson talked about recently. I thought was interesting, or not recently, but I don't know. I was talking to Robert Anton Wilson recently, and he was telling me about how humans, when they're babies, they tried at one point to take babies during, the orphans and give them to nuns and wet nurses to keep them alive. And even the wealthy did this as well, give them to wet nurses, but they would rotate the wet nurses to make sure that the baby didn't have an attachment. They didn't want a baby having an attachment to a woman who's going to leave the baby. So it just made common sense to have rotated nurses to try to avoid attachment. The problem is the baby would end up coming up with a mother anyway, imprinting love for a particular one of the wet nurses anyway. It doesn't matter, because it's just a natural thing that the human mind does, is seek out the mother, to seek out the divine heavenly mother of the psyche, however you want to look at it. So it's something that I think is interesting, that they really, what starts out in Mormonism is this idea of the family, of love, of the divine heavenly mother. Oh, Jacob's back. There he is.
Hello.
The divine heavenly mother gets replaced with this idea of like the king with his concubines. And so that is the part I find really interesting. It's so antithetical to the structure of the American civil religion that it started out as.
Let's go back to 32 minutes and 50 seconds. Keep going where you are, because Don Bradley makes a bold claim, and then he gives some details on how solid that claim is. 32, 50.
One reason why Joseph Smith's polygamy during his lifetime is not as well documented as we would like, be that he would keep a practice secret. You're not documenting it well, right? Like, that's the idea. You don't have a reason to be documenting it.
Keep it going.
At this time, it's illegal under Illinois law. You don't want to create documents that are going to leave a paper trail for prosecution or something, right? Yeah. If you're trying to keep it secret, you're trying to keep it secret. That means you're not documenting it. And yet, we end up with, about, by my count, I've collected together, along with another friend, about 30 sources on Joseph Smith teaching and practicing polygamy from during his lifetime.
Pause.
Okay, I found this really, really interesting that Don Bradley decided to say that. I can't even believe that he said that.
He's made that claim twice. Me and another friend have identified 30 sources of Joseph Smith teaching polygamy during his lifetime. Now he's about to reveal the strongest. For example, if I were to make a claim to where I've got a list that's dozens or more long, he's going to share what he thinks is the strongest from that list. For example, press play and let's hear what Don Bradley thinks is the strongest contemporary evidence that Joseph Smith was a polygamist.
All right.
Okay.
Because that is actually something I've heard multiple times, that there are no contemporary accounts.
No. There are like 30. Okay. So some of them are ones that these folks respond to, like the Nauvoo Expositor affidavits that describe the revelation, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they will say things like, well, the revelation mentioned 10 virgins, right? But then they'll nitpick it and they'll say, well,
press pause.
It said that 10 virgins was the limit.
Okay. So what is he claiming is the strongest contemporary evidence? The accusers in the Nauvoo Expositor.
Right.
Oh, is that Joseph Smith teaching polygamy? No, these are the people who are clear. We want this man displaced or killed. They're trying to organize a mob. And Don Bradley forms like his strongest contemporary evidence are these traitors trying to get Joseph Smith killed. It shows you how now, in other words, I would love to see this list of 30 contemporary.
Yeah, but don't start with the Nauvoo Expositor, man. I've seen, do you have archive.org? Have you ever read the Nauvoo Expositor just for fun? Yes. There's articles about UFOs. There's articles about UFOs, man. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. There's stories about the immortal man. There's fairies. People wrote newspapers to sell them. And they had to have these, again, orphan foundling boys out there screaming stories that were more interesting than the newspaper itself. So there's a feedback loop. People don't really understand how news how news is sold. It bothers me. Keep going.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say on Don Bradley. I'd love to see this list, because even though I'm jabbing at his obvious weak positions here, if he's got stronger stuff than that, I want to follow it to its logical conclusions. But when he says the Nauvoo Expositor is the evidence on which he hangs his hat that Joseph Smith really, really was teaching polygamy, because section 132 says 10 virgins, so does the Nauvoo Expositor.
Yeah.
It doesn't, for some reason, he glosses over the fact that Joseph Smith addressed what was read to the High Council in July of 1842. And Joseph Smith says there was questions regarding marriage in old times and polygamy. And I addressed that. And he was specific in saying it has nothing to do with these times. Now, whoever the God is revealing the doctrine of many wives and concubines is teaching something very different than Joseph Smith ever taught.
It's also interesting, like if you get to like read some of his like papers, like it's not just that he's saying like in a tweet, like I'm against this or something like that. He's writing really long outside of the Book of Mormon, outside of the Doctrines and Covenants. Like he's writing really long letters about the abolition of slavery, about the importance of monogamous marriage, of having children, our virtuous liberty, that everyone has to be, endowed with the same equal rights. I mean, it's pretty much, it's not just a rhetoric, like if you build that much of a case and you're constantly saying these things that are bothering everybody, these are things that are not popular opinions with most of America. It's not, I mean, it's interesting that they're trying to say he's doing this on the side of also like, and then the main goal of it being like these 10 virgins, which never materialized because we're talking about married women with like 8-month pregnancy.
Third trimester pregnant women.
It's just really weird. I'm sorry. Like I do like the fake news.
Cardin Ellis, tell me when you're going to tell me how you'd be feeling if President Nelson says your pregnant wife is going to be married to me in the hereafter.
Yeah, I mean, so you want to understand, like, is that really something that ever happened before? Because if it happened before, it could happen again. Like that isn't as unreasonable of a question to ask, I guess. Do you want to? I'll pull back up to the Don Bradley. Hold on.
That's all that I wanted to hit. That's what I took notes on, and I'm going to be making on my channel like a pretty thorough response video, just strictly sticking to Don Bradley's claims, because there's a lot of mischaracterizations and what I believe is less than faithful framing of the issue. But Don Bradley is what's taught in section 132 is not polygamy. The word polygamy is not even used. What Don Bradley is promoting is the doctrine of many wives and concubines. Read it to your wife tonight. Let me know how it goes, Don.
Well, I mean, so on that note, also, I've talked to Don, and if anyone, I'd love to get Don on the show. I think we're planning on it at some point. He's very busy with all kinds of things, but hopefully that does happen. And Kwaku, he'd put out at the end of this interview thing, he says he wants to set up kind of like a debate or something to that effect, right? Where is it? He said you want to have like a debate between the believer, he called them pneumos or the neomos. I like that.
Nemos. I like that term. That's a good term. The pneumos.
Nemo. What's that movie called? Nemo.
Nemo.
No, there's a better one. Nemo Adventure Slumberland. Yep, that's it. You need to watch this Nemo. This is the best Nemo. This is a movie about a boy in his dreams.
Nemo. I remember this.
Little Nemo is the most important Nemo. Yeah, so we're all Nemos now. Well done, Kwaku. You came up with a term I like. Neomos even. But so he says he wants to have Neomos versus Tradmos do a debate with some. I think they think of themselves as Tradmos, traditional Mormons, LDSers.
Yeah. So tell me how traditional you are. When that's the president of the church marry your pregnant wife. Yeah, tell me all about that, Tradmo.
You remind me a lot more of Slavoj Zizek than you might think. That's pretty good. Well, all right. So hopefully, though, we can actually put that together. Kwaku, if you're serious about that, I'm the secular guy here, arguably. I don't know what secular means anymore because it's more supernatural and magical and like faith-based than it used to be. But let's definitely try to get something together where we can talk about these things, because I'd love to see this for the historicity of it, but also for the philosophical debate of what is the more valuable thing that we're trying to serve, right? Because this is all about serving a consequential purpose. If you're doing a thing, it should lead to a thing. That's what they always say, like, where's the fruit of the tree? So like, what is the consequences of a thing like that? I mean, clearly it's been removed, so you can't even see those consequences anymore. So we have to study the history of those consequences at the time. And yeah, at some point I want to do more of a thing on like Freemasonry and polygamy, because looking at these groups of polygamists in Rome and Italy, even the Jesuits who said you weren't going to get married anymore because of the pseudo-Isodorian decrees, they kept having tons of these families and wives. Like you've got popes with kids. I'm related to like 3 popes from Croatia, right? Whoa.
Much for celibacy.
Yeah, exactly. Pope Caius, Pope John the IV, and Pope Gregory the First, right? All. So yeah, it's like, well, how's that work? But the idea then that this new religion, like they moved into the United States, and the interesting thing is when they leave the United States, where do they go? Mexico, right? And so Mexico is interesting because that was the Freemasonic capital. The French had taken over Mexico at that time. So it's really interesting that there's some sort of a connection there between something that's using this American civil religion as a sort of shield while they're practicing this like esoteric beliefs, which are still being practiced, it sounds like, by certain people that are outside of the centric organization, or maybe so deep in the center of it they're outside of Utah. I don't know how it works, but that's a thing to consider. Is there anything else you wanted to like bring up about this?
That's all I wanted to say. It was just a last anecdote in Moses chapter 5, which is from Joseph Smith's translation of the Old Testament. The first ever known polygamist is Lamech, the person who takes over the satanic secret combination from Cain, and his wives Ada and Zillah. So that's the beginning of polygamy in the scriptures as we know it.
My word, Lamech. Okay, and that also gets me on a thought. If anyone's got connections to Dan Vogel, I do want to talk to Dan Vogel about this stuff and his whole secret combinations, Masonic conspiracy, a metaphor about Mormonism. But all right, I love you, Jacob. You're an amazing man. God bless you. We're going to talk more, amigo. And everyone else, I think we're doing another show with Kurt and Gunwoo later. Surprise! Okay, we'll talk to you all later. Take care. Goodbye.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Exert Us. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Она образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, your skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Exert Us. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Exert Us.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
Bye.